The Rebel Capitalist Show.
All countries pretty much are in this position where they have to transition, but that transition is by no means easy.
No.
And you're going to have to crack a lot of eggs to make that omelet. you know, that's most likely what we'll see play out or there's a high probability that that's what we'll see play out. And, to your point with Grant, what's happening between Russia and Ukraine is kind of giving them cover to make this happen without having to admit the system is flawed, the system is broken, and they are going to make this transition whether we like it or not.
Yeah, I mean, to me, yeah, there are really great risks because things are so globalized. Everything, all the supply chains globally are optimized for efficiency and not resilience.
Yeah, right.
So you can start to see just little hints of, look, what percentage of global grain production Russia and Ukraine are, right? That starts to get very scary throughout the emerging markets. When you start to see things like Bayer a couple days ago, who owns Monsanto, say, we're thinking about cutting off seed sales to Russia in 2023. So you're going to weaponize seeds? Like that's, this goes down a very ugly path. Semiconductors, seizing of factories. There isn't a company or anywhere in the world whose value isn't going to get massively haircut if that starts to happen, right? There's this move to resiliency, and I don't want to say autarky, but more self-sufficient that I think we're seeing happen simply by virtue of what people don't want, right? Of the supply chain weakness, vulnerability, national defense. U.S. it's around national defense. The Chinese, it's around resources constraints. The Europeans, it's kind of resource constraints. India, same thing. So everyone has a set of interests that they don't fit perfectly, but they fit close enough that something can sort of, there's some meeting room where everyone can sort of agree. But, to your point, just like in the U.S., there's competing interests. In every one of these places, there's competing interests. And there's relative winners and losers and different relative political powers. And it's mechanically, it's really easy. If I was king of the world, I could have this thing smoothed out in 6 months if I didn't listen to anybody and I didn't mind cracking those eggs, etc. But I'm not the king of the world. No one's king of the world. And there's competing interests in each of these different places, even though I think sort of the Nash equilibrium is pretty clear, right? I'm just laying out the Nash equilibrium. That's sort of the point that maximizes everybody's interest. It's there. It's a neutral reserve asset. Now, can we get there, or do we need to burn the joint down like we've done a couple times in the past?
Do you think if this system plays out, and obviously there are no certainties, there are only probabilities, do you think in 5 years or so that the world looks far more like it did when we were growing up as opposed to the last, let's say, 20 years? And what I mean by that is, for those of you who are a little younger than myself or Luke, when we were growing up, the world was really divided into East and West, and not like it is today. I mean, the East only did business with the East, and the West really only did business for the most part with the West. It was just, there was that line in the sand where they had their own economy and we had our own economy and way of doing things. Do you think we'll see that again in the future, where you've got a group of countries that kind of join forces and say, okay, we're going to create our own currency system. We're going to create our own system for trading energy. We're going to create, our own agreements. And then the other, the Australias, the Canadas, the United States, the Western Europe says, we're just going to do the same thing. And we're just not going to pay attention to that other side of the world.
I think it's very possible, because when some of what we're discussing is fundamentally cultural differences, right? In terms of systems of governance and rule of law and property protections and things like that. And some of these things you may not be able to come to some sort of consensus on. And so it's possible. I don't know. I think it's possible.
If that happens, and if the major oil producers, because I'm thinking about the low cost oil producers right now, and one thing that I haven't seen many people really think through is, everyone looks at the ruble going to 150, and now it's back to what, 120 or 110, something like that.
95. It's actually up 35% in the last week.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
That was my reaction when I saw it this morning. I'm like, what? Anyway, so go on.
But when it went to 150, everyone was talking about how this is just going to collapse the Russian economy. And I tweeted out, I get there's downside, but let's think about this, because, their currency is being devalued. Their revenues, for a large part, are in dollars. Their expenses are rubles. So doesn't that mean that profit margins go through the roof with these energy producers? But my point there is, if you take the Russia, which I think when the ruble was about 150, they were the lowest cost oil producer in the world,
easily
in dollars.
Yep.
But then when you take the Russias, the Iran, the Venezuela, who else is really low? Saudi Arabia is super, super low. But the group that would form kind of the quote unquote East, I think, would have 95% of the cheap oil. So how does that work? If now it's just India, Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Venezuela, basically everyone that we've pissed off over the past, everyone that we've weaponized the dollar against.
By the way, there's a lot of Europe that's playing both sides right now, that it's going to be like, yeah, we love you, we love you, we love you. In about 2 years, and you're like, surprise, pissed off. Yeah.
So I guess maybe the better question is, what does the West do if they have to exclusively survive on the oil they produce?
I think it's an even bigger question than oil, right? Like, these things have been building up for so long. I remember reading an article in the Financial Times in 2013 where it said that for the first time in 300 years, the emerging markets were the majority of global GDP, right? So like, there is no precedent for what we're living through. For the first time ever, emerging markets are the majority of oil production. China is the world's biggest trading partner, surpassing the United States like 5 years ago. There's sort of the Mackinder theory, right, of Eurasia. Whoever rules the Eurasia, the world island, controls the world. And U.S. foreign policy, Anglo-American foreign policy, you forget U.S., but Anglo-American policy going back 100 plus years has been influenced, at the very least, that's probably understating the case, has been influenced by Mackinder policy. Keep the Germans away from the Russians, away from the Chinese, basically, right? Keep that whole gigantic economic powerhouse separated from each other. And now they're coming together in some way, shape, or form. Yes, right now, I think, Germany, Russia, the situation there may be a little bit more fluid in the short run. I don't think it's fluid in the long run. I think they're telling you all you need to know with the Gazprom, with the Nord Stream 2 and the pipelines, et cetera. In the long run, I think they see their future tide going east, not west. So that's where it gets really tricky, right? When I say, can you see this split, is culturally, they want to do things a certain way. We want to do things a certain way. We have enough to go on our own, but do we have enough,
at what price though?
Yeah, they've got a lot of They take their ball and go home. We take our ball and go home. That's a lot of disruption, right? So it's Harold Malmgren gave an interview where he talked of meeting Putin, a couple decades ago. And basically talked about the way they problem solve in Russia is everybody gets together as a dinner, both sides get together. It's understood that everybody at the dinner is armed, and that if they don't come to an agreement at the dinner, it's going to get bloody. And so inevitably something gets resolved that is maybe not mutually acceptable, right, to everybody at least, and they move on. And so to me it feels like this almost has to be like what happens, because. And maybe it's the optimist in me, ironically enough, that I don't know I don't know what that other side of things looks like. And that's, I kind of go back to the banks was like, oh, this dollar system. Like, you don't understand. you keep pushing this thing, like it geologically and debt wise, it's going to break chaotically. So the time to get a parachute out is not when you're 100 feet from the ground. It's when you're, a mile up or whatever, 2,000 feet up. So I don't know. I mean, look at the price.
You know what I think it boils down to, Luke, is, our good friend Art Berman, one of the first times I interviewed him, he just said something that will stick with me forever. He just says, energy is the economy.
Energy is the real currency, right? Like if you think about the economy in terms of energy as the currency, not the dollar, everything starts to make way more sense.
Yeah, agreed.